Okay, good evening. It is time for some more Dark Elf Trilogy. We're still reading Homeland. I've been a little sporadic about reading it lately. So we're on chapter 22 tonight, and I know that it happens to be a pretty long chapter. So we'll see how my voice is feeling when we get to the end of it. So here we go. So this one is titled Gnomes, Wicked Gnomes. Among the twists and turns of the tunnel mazes of the Underdark, slipping about their silent way went the Svirfnebli, the deep gnomes, neither kind nor evil, and so out of place in this world of pervading wickedness, the deep gnomes survived and thrived. Haughty fighters, skilled in crafting weapons and armor, and more in tune to the songs of the stone than even the evil gray dwarves. The Svirfnebli continued their business of plucking gems and precious metals in spite of the perils awaiting them at every turn. When the news came back to Blingdenstone, the cluster of tunnels and caverns that composed the Deep Gnome City, that a rich vein of gemstones had been discovered 20 miles to the east, as the rockworm, the Thokwa, burrow-warden Belwar Disengulp had to climb over a dozen others of his rank to be awarded the privilege of leading the mining expedition. Belwar and all the others knew well that 40 miles east, as the rockworm burrowed, would put the expedition dangerously close to Menzoberranzan. It just said 20, now it says 40. Okay. Um, and that even getting there would mean a week of hiking, probably through the territories of 100 other enemies. Fear was no measure against the love Svirfnebli had for gems, though, and every day in the Underdark was a risk. When Belwar and his 40 miners arrived in the small cavern described by the advance scouts, and inscribed with the gnome's mark of treasure, they found that the claims had not been exaggerated. The burrow warden took care not to get overly excited, though. He knew that 20,000 drow elves, the Svirfnebli's most hated and feared enemy, lived fewer than 5 miles away. Escape tunnels became the first order of business, winding constructions high enough for a 3-foot gnome, but not for a taller pursuer. All along the course of these, the gnomes placed breaker walls designed to deflect a lightning bolt or offer some protection from the expanding flames of a fireball. Then, when the true mining at last began, Belwar kept fully a third of his crew on guard at all times, and walked the area of the work with one hand always clutching the magical emerald, the summoning stone he kept on a chain around his neck. Three full patrol groups, Drizzt remarked to Dynan when they arrived at the open field on the eastern side of Menzoberranzan. Few stalagmites lined this region of the city, but it did not seem so open now, with dozens of anxious drow milling about. Gnomes are not to be taken lightly, Dynan replied. They are wicked and powerful. As wicked as surface elves? Drizzt had to interrupt, covering his sarcasm with false exuberance. Almost, his brother warned grimly, missing the connotations of Drizzt's question. Dynan pointed off to the side, where a contingent of female drow was coming to join the group. Clerics, he said, and one of them a high priestess. The rumors of activity must have been confirmed. A shudder coursed through Drizzt, a tingle of pre-battle excitement. That excitement was altered and lessened, though, by fear not of physical harm, or even of the gnomes. Drizzt feared that this encounter might be a repeat of the surface tragedy. He took the black thought he shook the black thoughts away, and reminded himself that this time, unlike the surface expedition, his home was being invaded. The gnomes had crossed the boundaries of the drow realm. If they were as evil as Dynan and all the others claimed, Menzoberranzan had no choice but to respond with force. If. Drizzt's patrol, the most celebrated group among the males, was selected to lead, and Drizzt, as always, took the point position. Still unsure, he wasn't thrilled with the assignment, and as they started out, Drizzt even contemplated leading the group astray, or perhaps, Drizzt thought, he could contact the gnomes privately before the others arrived and warn them to flee. Drizzt realized the absurdity of the notion. He couldn't stop the wheels of Menzoberranzan from turning along their designated course, and he couldn't do anything to hinder the 2 score drow warriors, excited and impatient, at his back. Again he was trapped and on the edge of despair. Masoj Hunnet appeared then and made everything better. Gwenhwyvar, the young wizard called, and the great panther came bounding. Masoj left the cat beside Drizzt and headed back toward his place in the line. Gwenhwyvar could no more hide its elation at seeing Drizzt than Drizzt could contain his own smile. With the interruption of the surface raid and then his time back home, he hadn't seen Gwenhwyvar in more than a month. Gwenhwyvar thumped against Drizzt's side as it passed, nearly knocking the slender drow from his feet. Drizzt responded with a heavy pat, vigorously rubbing a hand over the cat's ear. They both turned back together, suddenly conscious of the unhappy glare boring into them. There stood Masoj, arms crossed over his chest, and a visible scowl heating up his face. "I shan't use the cat to kill Drizzt," the young wizard muttered to himself. "I want the pleasure for myself." Drizzt wondered if jealousy prompted that scowl. Jealousy of Drizzt and the cat, or of everything in general. Masoj had been left behind when Drizzt had gone to the surface. Masoj had been no more than a spectator when the victorious raiding party returned in glory. Drizzt backed away from Gwenhwyvar, sensitive to the wizard's pain. As soon as Masoj had moved away to take his position farther down the line, Drizzt dropped to one knee and threw a headlock on Gwenhwyvar. Drizzt found himself even gladder for Gwenhwyvar's companionship when they passed beyond the familiar tunnels of the normal patrol routes. It was a saying in Menzoberranzan that, quote, that's a habit. No one is as alone as the point of a drow patrol. And Drizzt had come to understand this keenly in the last few months. He stopped at the far end of a wide way and held perfectly still, focusing his ears and eyes to the trails behind him. He knew that more than 40 drow were approaching his position, fully arrayed for battle and agitated. Still, not a sound could Drizzt detect, and not a motion was discernible in the eerie shadows of cool stone. Okay, we're supposed to be in a ad, but it doesn't look like it's starting. So we'll see. I'll just continue. Drizzt looked down at Gwenhwyvar, waiting patiently by his side, and started off again. He could sense the hot presence of the war party at his back. That intangible sensation was the only thing that disproved Drizzt's feelings that he and Gwenhwyvar were quite alone. Near the end of that day, Drizzt heard the first signs of trouble as he neared an intersection in the tunnel, cautiously pressed close to one wall. He felt a subtle vibration in the stone. It came again a second later, and then again, and Drizzt recognized it as the rhythmic tapping of a pick or hammer. He took a magically heated sheet, a small square that fit into the palm of his hand, out of his pack. One side of the item was shielded in heavy leather, but the other shone brightly to eyes seeing in the infrared spectrum. Drizzt flashed it down the tunnel behind him, and a few seconds later Dynan came up to his side. Oh, and we are in an ad. I just noticed that. So I will reread that last sentence or so once the ad is done. Oh, see now, it says we're still in an ad for another 30 seconds, but I'm seeing on another device that we're back. So anyway, I'll just start over with that sentence. One side of the item was shielded in heavy leather, but the other shone brightly to eyes seeing in the infrared spectrum. Drizzt flashed it down the tunnel behind him, and a few seconds later Dynan came up to his side. Hammer, Drizzt signaled in the silent code, pointing to the wall. Dynan pressed against the stone and nodded in confirmation. 50 yards, Dynan's hand motion asked. Less than 100, Drizzt confirmed. With his own prepared sheet, Dynan flashed the get ready signal into the gloom behind him, then moved with Drizzt and Guenhwyvar around the intersection toward the tapping. Only a moment later, Drizzt looked upon Svirfnebli gnomes for the very first time. There's a typo here. I'm not sure what it's supposed to be. 10 guards stood barely 20 feet away, chest high to a drow and hairless, with skin strangely akin to the stone in both texture and heat radiations. The gnome's eyes glowed brightly in the telltale red of infravision. One glance at those eyes reminded Drizzt and Dynan that deep gnomes were as much at home in the darkness as were the drow, and they both prudently ducked behind a rocky outcropping in the tunnel. Dynan promptly signaled to the next drow in line, and so on until the entire party was alerted. Then he crouched low and peeked out around the bottom of the outcropping. The tunnel continued another 30 feet beyond the gnome guards and around a slight bend, ending in some larger chamber. Dynan couldn't clearly see this area, but the glow of it from the heat of the work and a cluster of bodies spilled out into the corridor. Again Dynan signaled back to his hidden comrades, and then he turned to Drizzt. "Stay here with the cat," he instructed, and he darted back down around the intersection to formulate plans with the other leaders. Masoj, a few places back in the line, noted Dynan's movement and wondered if the opportunity to deal with Drizzt had suddenly come upon him. If the patrol was discovered with Drizzt all alone up in front, was there some way Masoj could secretly blast the young Do'Urden? The opportunity, if ever it was truly there, passed quickly, though, as other drow soldiers came up beside the plotting wizard. Dynan soon returned from the back of the line and headed back to join his brother. "The chamber has many exits," Dynan signaled to Drizzt when they were together. "The other patrols are moving into position around the gnomes." Another weird typo. Might we parley with the gnomes?" Drizzt's hands asked in reply, almost subconsciously. He recognized the expression spreading across Dynan's face, but knew that he had already plunged in. "Send them away without conflict?" Dynan grabbed Drizzt by the front of his puwafwi and pulled him close, too close, to that terrible scowl. "I will forget that you asked that question," he whispered, and he dropped Drizzt back to the stone, considering the issue closed. "You start the fight," Dynan signaled. "When you see the sign from behind, darken the corridor and rush past the guards. Get to the gnome leader. He is the key to their strength with the stone." Drizzt didn't fully understand what gnomish power his brother hinted at, but the instructions seemed simple enough, if somewhat suicidal. "Take the cat if the cat will go," Dynan continued. "The entire patrol will be by your side in moments. The remaining group will come in from the other passages." Guenhwyvar nuzzled up to Drizzt, more than ready to follow him into battle. Drizzt took comfort in that when Dynan departed, leaving him alone again at the front. Only a few seconds later came the command to attack. Drizzt shook his head in disbelief when he saw the signal. How fast drow warriors found their positions. He peeked around at the gnomish guards, still holding their silent vigil, completely unaware. Drizzt drew his blades and patted Guenhwyvar for luck, then called upon the innate magic of his race and dropped a globe of darkness in the corridor. Squeals of alarm sounded throughout the tunnels, and Drizzt charged in, diving right into the darkness between the unseen guards and rolling back to his feet on the other side of his spell, only 2 running strides from the small chamber. He saw a dozen gnomes scrambling about, trying to prepare their defenses. Few of them said paid few of them paid Drizzt any attention, though as the sounds of battle erupted from various side corridors. One gnome chopped a heavy pick at Drizzt's shoulder. Drizzt got a blade up to block the blow, but was amazed at the strength in the diminutive gnome's arms. Still, Drizzt could then have killed his attacker with the other scimitar. Too many doubts and too many memories, though, haunted his actions. He brought a leg up into the gnome's belly, sending the little creature sprawling. Belwar Disengulp, next in line for Drizzt, noted how easily the young drow had dispatched one of his finest fighters, and knew that the time had already come to use his most powerful magic. He pulled the emerald summoning stone from his neck and threw it to the ground at Drizzt's feet. Drizzt jumped back, sensing the emanations of magic. Behind him, Drizzt heard the approach of his companions, overpowering the shocked gnome guards and rushing to join him in the chamber. Then Drizzt's attentions went squarely to the heat patterns of the stone floor in front of him. The grayish lines wavered and swam as if the stone was somehow coming alive. The other drow fighters roared in past Drizzt, bearing down on the gnome leader and his charges. Drizzt didn't follow, guessing that the event unfolding at his feet was more critical than the general battle now echoing throughout the complex. 15 feet tall and 7 wide, an angry, towering, humanoid monster of living stone rose before Drizzt. "Elemental!" came a scream to the side. Drizzt glanced over to see Masoj, Gwenvivar at his side, fumbling through a spell book, apparently in search of some dweomer to battle this unexpected monster. To Drizzt's dismay, the frightened wizard mumbled a couple of words and vanished. Drizzt set his feet under him and took a measure of the monster, ready to spring aside in an instant. He could sense the thing's power, the raw strength of the earth embodied in living arms and legs. A lumbering arm swung out in a wide arc, whooshing above Drizzt's ducking head and slamming into the cavern wall, crushing rocks into dust. "Do not let it hit me," Drizzt instructed himself, in a whisper that came out as a disbelieving gasp. As the elemental recoiled its arm, Drizzt poked a scimitar at it, chipping away a small chunk, barely a scratch. The elemental grimaced in pain, apparently Drizzt could indeed hurt it with his enchanted weapons. Still standing in the same spot off to the side, the invisible Masoj held his next spell in check, watching the spectacle and waiting for the combatants to weaken each other. Perhaps the elemental would destroy Drizzt altogether. Invisible Shoulders gave a resigned shrug. Masoj decided to let the gnomish power do his dirty work for him. The monster launched another blow and another, and Drizzt dove forward and scrambled through the thing's stone pillar legs. The elemental reached quickly and stomped heavily with one foot, barely missing the agile drow and sending branching cracks in the floor for many feet in either direction. Drizzt was up in a flash, slicing and thrusting with both his blades into the elemental's backside, then springing back out of reach as the monster swung about, leading with another ferocious blow. The sounds of battle grew more distant. The gnomes had taken flight, those that were still alive, but the drow warriors were in full pursuit, leaving Drizzt to face the elemental. The monster stomped again, the thunder of his foot nearly knocking Drizzt from his feet, and then it came in hard, falling down at Drizzt, using the tonnage of its body as a weapon. If Drizzt had been even slightly surprised, or if his reflexes had not been honed to such perfection, he surely would have been crushed flat. He managed to get to the side of the monster's bulk, while taking only a glancing blow from a swinging arm. Dust rushed up from the terrific impact. Cavern walls and ceiling cracked and dropped flecks and stones to the floor. As the elemental regained its feet, Drizzt backed away, overwhelmed by such unconquerable strength. He was all alone against it, or so Drizzt thought. A sudden ball of hot fury enveloped the elemental's head, claws raking deep scratches into its face. Gwenwivar, Drizzt and Massoj shouted in unison. Drizzt in elation that an ally had been found, and Massoj in rage. The wizard did not want Drizzt to survive this battle, and he dared not launch any magical attacks at Drizzt or the elemental with his precious Gwenwivar in the way. "Do something, wizard!" Drizzt cried, recognizing the shout, and understanding now that Massoj was still around. The elemental bellowed in pain, its cry sounding as the rumble of heavy boulders crashing down a rocky mountain. Even as Drizzt moved back in to help his feline friend, the monster spun, impossibly quick, and dove headfirst to the floor. "No!" Drizzt cried, realizing that Gwenwivar would be crushed. Then the cat and the elemental, instead of slamming against the stone, sank down into it. The purple flames of fairy fire outlined the figures of the gnomes, showing the way for drow arrows and swords. The gnomes countered with magic of their own, illusionary tricks mostly. "Down here," one drow soldier cried, only to slam face first into the stone of a wall that had appeared as the entrance to a corridor. Even though the gnome magic managed to keep the dark elves somewhat confused, Belwar Disengulp grew frightened. His elemental, his strongest magic and only hope, was taking too long with the single drow warrior far back in the main chamber. The burrow warden wanted the monster by his side when the main combat began. He ordered his forces into tight defensive formations, hoping that they could hold out. Then the drow warriors, detained no more by gnomish tricks, were upon them, and fury stole Belwar's fear. He lashed out with his heavy pickaxe, smiling grimly as he felt the mighty weapon bite into drow flesh. All magic was aside now. All formations and carefully laid battle plans dissolved into the wild frenzy of the brawl. Nothing mattered except to hit the enemy, to feel the pickhead or blade sink into flesh. Above all others, deep gnomes hated the drow, and in all the Underdark there was nothing a dark elf enjoyed more than slicing a svirfnebli into littler pieces. Drizzt rushed to the spot, but only the unbroken section of floor remained. "Massoj," he gasped, looking for some answers from the one schooled in such strange magic. Before the wizard could answer, the floor erupted behind Drizzt. He spun, weapons ready, to face the towering elemental. Then Drizzt watched in helpless agony as the broken mist that was the great panther, his dearest companion, rolled off the elemental's shoulders and broke apart as it neared the floor. Drizzt ducked another blow, though his eyes never left the dissipating dust and mist cloud. Was Gwenwivar no more? Was his only friend gone from him forever? A new light grew in Drizzt's lavender eyes, a primal rage that simmered throughout his body. He looked back to the elemental, unafraid. "You are dead," he promised, and he walked in. The elemental seemed confused, though of course it could not understand Drizzt's words. It dropped a heavy arm straight down to squash its foolish opponent. Drizzt did not even raise his blades to parry, knowing that every ounce of his strength could not possibly deflect such a blow. Just as the falling arm was about to reach him, he dashed forward within its range. The quickness of his move surprised the elemental, and the ensuing flurry of swordplay took Massoj's breath away. The wizard had never seen such grace in battle, such fluidity of motion. Drizzt climbed up and down the elemental's body, hacking and slashing, digging the points of his weapons home and flicking off pieces of the monster's stone skin. The elemental howled its avalanche howl and spun in circles, trying to catch up to Drizzt and squash him once and for all. Blind rage brought new levels of expertise to the magnificent young swordsman, though, and the elemental caught nothing but air or its own stony body under its heavy slaps. "Impossible," Massoj muttered when he found his breath. Could the young Do'Urden actually defeat an elemental? Masoj scanned the rest of the area. Several drow and many gnomes lay dead or grievously wounded, but the main fighting was moving even farther away as the gnomes found their tiny escape tunnels, and the drow, enraged beyond good sense, followed them. Gwenhwyvar was gone. In this chamber, only Masoj, the elemental, and Drizzt remained as witnesses. The invisible wizard felt his mouth draw up in a smile. Now was the time to strike. Drizzt had the elemental lurching to one side, nearly beaten when the bolt roared in, a blast of lightning that blinded the young drow and sent him flying into the chamber's back wall. Drizzt watched the twitch of his hands, the wild dance of his stark white hair before his unmoving eyes. He felt nothing, no pain, no reviving draw of air into his lungs, and heard nothing, as if his life force had been somehow suspended. The attack dispelled Masoj's dwemer of invisibility, and he came back into view, laughing wickedly. The elemental, down in a broken, crumbling mass, slowly slipped back into the security of the stone floor. "Are you dead?" the wizard asked Drizzt, the voice breaking, the hush of Drizzt's deafness in dramatic booms. Breaking the hush of... Okay. Drizzt could not answer, didn't really know the answer anyway. "Too easy," he heard Masoj say, and he suspected that the wizard was referring to him and not the elemental. Then Drizzt felt a tingling in his fingers and bones, and his lungs heaved suddenly, grabbing a volume of air. He gasped in rapid succession, then found control of his body and realized that he would survive. Masoj glanced around for returning witnesses and saw none. "Good," he muttered as he watched Drizzt regain his senses. The wizard was truly glad that Drizzt's death had not been so very painless. He thought of another spell that would make the moment more fun. A gigantic stone hand, reached out of the floor just then and grasped Masoj's leg, pulling his feet right into the stone. The wizard's face twisted in a silent scream. Drizzt's enemy saved his life. Drizzt snatched up one of the scimitars from the ground and hacked at the elemental's arm. The weapon sliced in, and the monster, its head reappearing between Drizzt and Masoj, howled in rage and pain and pulled the trapped wizard deeper into the stone. With both hands on the scimitar's hilt, Drizzt struck as hard as he could, splitting the elemental's head right in half. This time the rubble did not sink back into the earthen plane. This time the elemental was destroyed. "Get me out of here," Masoj demanded. Drizzt looked at him, hardly believing that Masoj was still alive, for he was waist deep in solid stone. "How?" Drizzt gasped. "You..." He couldn't even find the words to express his amazement. "Just get me out," the wizard cried. Drizzt fumbled about, not knowing where to begin. "Elementals travel between planes," Masoj explained, knowing that he had to calm Drizzt down if he ever wanted to get out of the floor. Masoj knew that, too, that the conversation would go a long way in deflecting Drizzt's obvious suspicions that the lightning bolt had been aimed at him. The ground and earth elemental traverses becomes a gate between the plane of earth and our plane, the material plane. The stone parted around me as the monster pulled me in, but it is quite uncomfortable. He twitched in pain as the stone tightened around one foot. The gate is closing fast. "Then Gwenhwyvar might be..." Drizzt started to reason. He plucked the statuette right out of Masoj's front pocket and carefully inspected it for any flaws in its perfect design. "Give me that!" Masoj demanded, embarrassed and angry. Reluctantly, Drizzt handed the figurine over. Masoj glanced at it quickly and dropped it back into his pocket. "Is Gwenhwyvar unharmed?" Drizzt had to ask. "It is not your concern," Masoj snapped back. The wizard, too, was worried about the cat, but at this moment Gwenhwyvar was the least of his troubles. "The gate is closing," he said again. "Go get the clerics." Before Drizzt could start off, a slab of stone in the wall behind him slid away, and a rock-hard fist of Belwar Disengulp slammed into the back of his head. That wasn't so bad. I thought that was a longer chapter. maybe I miscounted last time. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead into chapter 23. Let me see how long it is real quick. Um, okay, it's not that long. Wait a minute, I went past it. The breaks are not very good in this. I don't know who made this Kindle format book, but it kind of sucks as far as the breaks. They're really hard to see sometimes. Okay, so chapter 23, A Single Clean Blow. Um, the gnomes took him, Masoj said to Dynan when the patrol leader returned to the cavern. The wizard lifted his arms over his head to give the high priestess and her assistants a better view of his predicament. Where? Dynan demanded. Why did they let you live? Masoj shrugged. A secret door, he explained. Somewhere on the wall behind you. I suspect that they would have taken me as well, except Masoj looked down at the floor, still holding him tightly up to the waist. The gnomes would have killed me but for your arrival. You are fortunate, wizard, the high priestess said to Masoj. I have memorized a spell this day that will release the stone's hold on you. She whispered some instructions to her assistants, and they took out water skins and pouches of clay and began tracing a 10-foot square on the floor around the trapped wizard. The high priestess moved over to the wall of the chamber and prepared for her prayers. Some have escaped, Dynan said to her. The high priestess understood. She whispered a quick detection spell and studied the wall. Right there, she said. Dynan and another male rushed over to the spot and soon found the almost imperceptible outline to the secret door. As the high priestess began her incantation, one of her cleric assistants threw the end of a rope to Masoj. Hold on, the assistant teased, and hold your breath. Wait, Masoj began, but the stone floor all around him transformed into mud, and the wizard slipped under. The cleric, laughing, pulled Masoj out a moment later. Nice spell, the wizard remarked, spitting mud. It has its purposes, replied the high priestess, especially when we fight against the gnomes and their tricks with the stone. I carried it as a safeguard against earth elementals. She looked at a piece of rubble at her feet, unmistakably one eye and the nose of such a creature. I see that my spell was not needed in that manner. I destroyed that one, Masoj lied. Indeed, said the high priestess, unconvinced. She could tell by the cut of the rubble that a blade had made the wound. She let the issue drop when the scrape of sliding stone turned them all to the wall. A maze, moaned the fighter beside Dynan when he peered into the tunnel. How will we find them? Dynan thought for a moment, then spun on Masoj. They have my brother, he said, an idea coming to mind. Where is your cat? About, Masoj stalled, guessing Dynan's plan and not really wanting Drizzt rescued. Bring it to me, Dynan ordered. The cat can smell Drizzt. I cannot. Masoj stuttered. Now, wizard, Dynan demanded. Unless you wish me to tell the ruling council that some of the gnomes escaped because you refused to help. Masoj tossed the figurine to the ground and called for Gwenhwyvar, not really knowing what would happen next. Had the earth elemental really destroyed Gwenhwyvar? The mist appeared in seconds, transforming into the panther's corporeal body. Well, Dynan prompted, indicating the tunnel. Go find Drizzt, Masoj commanded the cat. Gwenhwyvar sniffed around the area for a moment, then bounded off down the small tunnel, the drow patrol in silent pursuit. Where Drizzt started when he finally began the long climb from the depths of unconsciousness. He understood that he was sitting, and knew too that his hands were bound in front of him. A small but undeniably strong hand caught him by the back of the hair and pulled his head back roughly. "Quiet!" Belwar whispered harshly, and Drizzt was surprised that the creature could speak his language. Belwar let go of Drizzt and turned to join other Svirfnebli. From the chamber's low height and the gnomes' nervous movements, Drizzt realized that this group had taken flight. The gnomes began a quiet conversation in their own tongue, which Drizzt could not begin to understand. One of them asked the gnome who had ordered Drizzt to be quiet, apparently the leader, a heated question. Another grunted his accord and spoke some harsh words, turning on Drizzt with a dangerous look in his eyes. The leader slapped the other gnome hard on the back and sent him off through one of the two low exits in the chamber, then put the others into defensive positions. He walked over to Drizzt. "You come with us to Blingdenstone," he said in hesitant words. "Then?" Drizzt asked. Belwar shrugged. "The king'll decide. If you cause me no trouble, I'll tell him to let you go." Drizzt laughed cynically. "Well then," said Belwar, "if the king says to kill you, I'll make sure it comes in a single clean blow." Again Drizzt laughed. Do you believe that I believe?" he asked. "Torture me now and have your fun. That is your evil way." Belwar started to slap him, but held his hand in check. "Svirfnebli don't torture," he declared, louder than he should have. "Drow elves torture." He turned away, but spun back, reiterating his promise. A single clean blow. Drizzt found that he believed the sincerity in the gnome's voice, and he had to accept that promise as a measure of mercy far greater than the gnome would have received if Dinan's patrol had captured him. Belwar turned to walk away, but Drizzt, intrigued, had to learn more of the curious creature. "How have you learned my language?" he asked. "Gnomes are not stupid," Belwar retorted, unsure of what Drizzt was leading to. "Nor are drow," Drizzt replied earnestly, "but I have never heard the language of the Svirfnebli spoken in my city." "There once was a drow in Blingdenstone," Belwar explained, now nearly as curious about Drizzt as Drizzt was about him. "Slave?" Drizzt reasoned. "Guest!" Belwar snapped. "Svirfnebli keep no slaves." Again Drizzt found that he could not refute the sincerity in Belwar's voice. "What is your name?" he asked. The gnome laughed at him. "Do you think me stupid?" Belwar asked. "You desire my name that you might use its power in some dark magic against me." "No," Drizzt protested. "I should kill you now for thinking me stupid." Belwar growled, ominously lifting his heavy pick. Drizzt shifted uncomfortably, not knowing what the gnome would do next. "My offer remains," Belwar said, lowering the pick. "No trouble, and I tell the king to let you go." Belwar didn't believe that would happen any more than did Drizzt, so the Svirfneblin, with a helpless shrug, offered Drizzt the next best thing, or else a single clean blow. A commotion from one of the tunnels turned Belwar away. "Belwar, Belwar!" called one of the other gnomes, rushing back into the small chamber. The gnome leader turned a wary eye on Drizzt to see if the drow had caught the mention of his name. Drizzt wisely kept his head turned away, pretending not to listen. He had indeed heard the name of the gnome leader who had shown him mercy. Belwar, the other Svirfneblin had said. Belwar, a name that Drizzt would never forget. Fighting from down the passage caught everyone's attention. Then, and several Svirfnebli scrambled back into the chamber. Drizzt knew from their excitement that the drow patrol was close behind. Belwar started barking out commands, mostly organizing the retreat down the chamber's other tunnel. Drizzt won. Weird typos. Drizzt wondered where he would fit into the gnome's thinking. Certainly, Belwar couldn't hope to outrun the drow patrol dragging along a prisoner. Then the gnome leader suddenly stopped talking and stopped moving. Too suddenly. The drow clerics had led the way in with their insidious paralyzing spells. Belwar and another gnome were held fast by the Dweomer, and the rest of the gnomes, realizing this, broke into a wild scramble for the rear exit. The drow warriors, Guenhwyvar leading the way, charged into the room. Any relief Drizzt might have felt at seeing his feline friend unharmed was buried under the ensuing slaughter. Dynan and his troops cut into the disorganized gnomes with typical drow savagery. In seconds, horrible seconds, that seemed like hours to Drizzt, only Belwar and the other gnome caught in the clerical spell remained alive in the chamber. Several of the Svirfnebli had managed to flee back down the back corridor, but most of the drow patrol was off in pursuit. Masoj came into the chamber last, looking thoroughly wretched in his mud-covered clothing. He remained at the tunnel exit and did not even look Drizzt's way, except to note that his panther was standing protectively beside the second boy of House Do'Urden. Again you have found your measure of luck and more, Dynan said to Drizzt, as he cut his brother's bonds, looking around at the carnage in the chamber. Drizzt wasn't so sure. Dynan handed him back his scimitars, then turned to the drow standing watch over the two paralyzed gnomes. Finish them, Dynan instructed. A wide smile spread over the other drow's face, and he pulled a jagged knife from his belt. He held it up in front of the gnome's face, teasing the helpless creature. Can they see it? He asked the high priestess. That is the fun of the spell, the high priestess replied. The Svirfneblin understands what is about to happen. Even now he is struggling to break out of the hold. Prisoners, Drizzt blurred. Dynan and the others turned to him, the drow with the dagger wearing a scowl, both angry and disappointed. For House Do'Urden, Drizzt asked Dynan hopefully. We could benefit from... Svirfnebli do not make good slaves, Dynan replied. No, agreed the high priestess, moving beside the dagger-wielding fighter. She nodded to the warrior, and his smile returned tenfold. He struck hard. Only Belwar remained. The warrior waved his blood-stained dagger ominously, and moved in front of the gnome leader. Not that one, Drizzt protested, unable to bear any more. Let him live, Drizzt wanted to say that Belwar could do them no harm, and that killing the defenseless gnome would be a cowardly and vile act. Drizzt knew that appealing to his kin for mercy would be a waste of time. Dynan's expression was more a look of anger than curiosity this time. If you kill him, then no gnomes will remain to return to their city and tell of our strength, Drizzt reasoned, grasping at the one slim hope he could find. We should send him back to his people, send him back to tell them of their folly in entering the domain of the drow. Dynan looked back to the high priestess for advice. It seems proper reasoning, she said with a nod. Dynan was not so certain of his brother's motives. Not taking his eyes off Drizzt, he said to the warrior, then cut off the gnome's hands. Drizzt didn't flinch, realizing that if he did, Dynan would surely slaughter Belwar. The warrior replaced the dagger on his belt and took out his heavy sword. Wait, said Dynan, still eyeing Drizzt. Release him from the spell first. I want to hear his screams. Several drow moved over to put the tips of their swords at Belwar's neck as the high priestess released her magic hold. Belwar made no moves. The appointed drow warrior grasped his sword in both hands, and Belwar, brave Belwar, held his arms straight out and motionless in front of him. Drizzt averted his gaze, unable to watch, and awaiting, fearing the gnome's cry. Belwar noted Drizzt's reaction. Was it compassion? The drow warrior then swung his sword. Belwar never took his stare off Drizzt as the sword cut across his wrists, lighting a million fires of agony in his arms. Neither did Belwar scream. He wouldn't give Dynan the satisfaction. The gnome leader looked back to Drizzt one final time as two drow warriors ushered him out of the chamber, and he recognized the true anguish and the apology behind the young drow's feigned impassive facade. Even as Belwar was leaving, the dark elves who had chased off after the fleeing gnomes returned from the other tunnel. We could not catch them in these tiny passageways, one of them complained. Damn, Dynan growled, sending a handless gnome victim back to Blingdenstone was one thing, but letting healthy members of the gnome expedition escape was quite another. I want them caught. Gwenhwyvar can catch them, Masoj proclaimed. Then he called the cat to his side and eyed Drizzt all the while. Drizzt's heart raced as the wizard patted the great cat. Come, my pet, Masoj said. There is hunting left to be done. The wizard watched Drizzt squirm at the words, knowing that Drizzt did not approve of Gwenhwyvar engaging in such tactics. They are gone? Drizzt asked Dynan, his voice on the edge of desperation. Running all the way back to Blingdenstone, Dynan replied calmly, if we let them. And will they return? Dynan's sour scowl reflected the absurdity of his brother's question. Would you? Our task is complete, then, Drizzt reasoned, trying vainly to find some way out of Masoj's ignoble designs for the panther. We have won the day, Dynan agreed, though our own losses have been great. We may find still more fun with the help of the wizard's pet. Fun, Masoj echoed pointedly at Drizzt. Begone, Gwenhwyvar, into the tunnels. Let us learn how fast a frightened gnome may run. Only a few minutes later, Gwenhwyvar came back into the chamber, dragging a dead gnome in its mouth. Return, Masoj commanded as Gwenhwyvar dropped the body at his feet. Bring me more. Drizzt's heart dropped at the sound of the corpse flopping to the stone floor. He looked into Gwenhwyvar's eyes and saw a sadness as profound as his own. The panther was a hunter, as honorable in its own way as was Drizzt. That the evil Masoj, though, uh, it's another weird typo. To the evil Masoj, though, Gwenhwyvar was a toy and nothing more, an instrument for his perverted pleasures, killing for no reason other than its master's joy of killing. In the hands of the wizard, Gwenhwyvar was no more than a murderer. Gwenhwyvar paused at the entrance to the small tunnel and looked to Drizzt almost apologetically. Return, Masoj screamed, and he kicked the cat in the rear. Then Masoj, too, turned an eye back on Drizzt, a vindictive eye. Masoj had missed his chance to kill the young Do'Urden. He would have to be careful how he explained such a mistake to his unforgiving mother. Masoj decided to worry about that unpleasant encounter later. For now, at least, he had the satisfaction of watching Drizzt suffer. Dynan and the others were oblivious to the unfolding drama between Masoj and Drizzt, too engaged in their wait for Gwenhwyvar's return, too engaged in their speculations of the expressions of terror the gnomes would cast back at such a perfect killer, too caught up in the macabre humor of the moment, that perverted drow humor that brought laughter when tears were needed. And that is the end of that. That takes us into part 5, Zaknafine, which a lot of times, yeah, it's like a one-page little um, introduction to that part of the book for whatever reason, and then it gets into chapter 24. But we will pick that up the next time around. So, who have we got around? Doesn't look like we have anybody really. Ren Flames has still got his always on thing going. I really, really, truly don't know what that's about. I don't know why he's been doing that. and Alyosha is doing basically the same thing. So I don't get it. I don't get it. Um, Maybe they're just playing that or running that when they're not on stream, and they're streaming at a different time that I'm just not catching. I have no idea. Anyway, yeah, so I'm going to quickly change that I read 22 and 23. Change the title there. And we will just call it a night. So I will see you maybe tomorrow night. Tomorrow's Thursday. I should be reading Star Wars. Probably I will not be tomorrow night, though. So Friday for the next Secret History of the World. So I will see you then.
Feeling shattered skies, watching teary blue eyes, wonder where I might find some peace of mind. Not lights like I've had, but more sophisticated into love relations. Now disassembling my own heart, 'cause my mind's a million places and giving up. So it's in my head. Just tell me it's not happening. Tell me it's not happening. Surrender myself. I feel the world collapsing, but it's over. Not lights like I've had, but more sophisticated into love.